we'll get to it. But
yes.
I think she has some preliminary stuff.
Yes, thank you all for returning. Good evening.
Yes.
I wanted to quickly, Alicia Brewster is here with us tonight. She was not able to make it last week. She is one of the partners with us and putting this event together. So I wanted to just let her tell you real quick, briefly, who she is and what her organization does. Go ahead, Alicia.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Dr. King. I am really excited about being here. I had a chance to listen to the recording from last week, and I know that I missed a wonderful conversation. So I'm looking forward to this evening. And it's great to see many people that I know in the room. So I'm looking forward to the conversation with all of you as well. So again, I'm Alicia Brewster, and I'm the program director for Sustaining Way and for South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. Sustaining Way is an interfaith nonprofit that uses education, collaboration, and advocacy to build a thriving, sustainable community and environment for current community members as well as future community members. South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light is an initiative of Sustaining Way, and it's also an affiliate of National Interfaith Power and Light. South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light is South Carolina's only statewide faith-based program that focuses just on environmental issues. And it's uniquely situated to work with the state's faith community to move South Carolina down a more just and sustainable path. And our environmental issues include raising and elevating concerns around climate change, as well as environmental justice and other concerns that many communities, especially those that are vulnerable throughout our state, face this. So I will put in the chat box our website. And if you are interested in learning more about South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, I do welcome you to check out our website, give me a call, email me, or follow us on social media. Again, very happy to be here and glad to be able to partner with the Atlantic Institute again on this wonderful event. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you. Alicia and I both know what it's like to wear many hats in many different organizations. All right, so I emailed everybody earlier the questions and some stuff. But I'm going to have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share. But first, Dr. King is going to just give us a recap of what our discussion was last week for the few of us that might not have been there. And then we're going to jump into questions and thoughts and things to consider. So I'm going to let her go ahead and start, and then I'll share my screen when we're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christina. I shared why I selected why we can't wait, that my master's thesis was on King's I Have a Dream speech. And so I studied the 60s, the first part of the 60s, the early and mid 60s very intently. And of course, this book comes out of that time, and I was intrigued with it then. It is not, of course, this is King's it's sort of compilation of King's essays and his sense for and his explanation of the movement. And then he gives us some insight, the movement at that time. It's a snapshot of it in that window of time. And he gives us a sense for what's going on, some of the thinking behind it, the spiritual dynamic that drives the movement. If you wanted a broader context, the seminal books on King Taylor Branch's Parting the Waters and David Garrow's Bearing the Cross. And of course, it's interesting, people living in history at that time and writing about it as it's almost in real time as it's unfolding, will have a different vantage point than, of course, those writing in even a decade later or a generation later. So to get a richer and a fuller context for what's going on, especially from a historical perspective, you can look at other sources. I said that this text, and I call it a text, book, use those interchangeably. It can be, the book can be looked at from three ways that I think are interesting. Of course, historically, right? Because King sort of tells us, chronicles here, what they did, why they did it, how they did it, what they wanted, what their methods were, what their setbacks were, what the challenges were. So he chronicles all of that. So we get that bit of history from the person living, and that figures really prominently in that history. But then you can also look at it that I think is particularly meaningful from our vantage point, being several decades away, is from this rhetorical perspective as a piece of rhetoric. It was a goal-oriented book. It was strategic, right? And when I say rhetoric, I'm not blowing it off or diminishing it in any way. I mean that it was designed to sway people's thinking, right? That is what leaders of movements, spokespeople of movements, that's their goal, that's their challenge. Ideally, that's their gift and their talent, right? It's to articulate the perspective, the movement to these various audiences. So to Black folks, right? He needed to, in both this book and especially in his oratory, he needed to let them know, he needed to reflect back to them what they were feeling, their values, their concerns. So he needed to say, I see you, I know you, I feel you, right? He needed to do that, and he needed to combine that with inspiration, right? You may not be there at the mountaintop. You may not be, we are in the valley right now. Let me tell you what that valley feels like. He was a master at doing that, right? Telling them how to feel, what sort of the sweltering racist, and I'm sort of butchering his words in the I Have a Dream speech, but all those incredible metaphors where people would hear and say, yes, yes, Lord, that is how I feel. But he couldn't let them stay there, right? What did he have to do? He had to inspire them. But what did he say? I have a dream. What else did he say? I've been to the mountaintop. Where did he see in the mountaintop? He saw the promised land, right? And so he had to do that. And so that was the challenge and today those of you who are leaders, Sebastian, I'm always thinking, any youth that that's in my presence is a leader. And you're going to be an aspiring leader, but what we can learn from that is that you have to understand and value the people that you're leading, but also have that inspirational aspect of it, right? So this is part of his discourse, his rhetoric, if you would, strategic rhetoric designed to accomplish goals, right? Just told you about Black people and one of the goals he might have with those who were Black people, or more precisely, more people who were participants of the movement. Just told you what he wanted for them. What did he want for white Southern moderates? It's like, well, I need to explain to you what you are seeing, because those who are against us are saying one thing, but in fact, something else, this is really what's going on. So let me give you this in-depth essaying of what's going on, what we're doing, why we're doing it. That's what this book does. It goes in depth in that explanation so that those folk who were inclined to hear, and of course, a lot of the rabid racists and the people who were diametrically opposed to him didn't want to hear it, right? But there was this swath of moderates who wanted to hear it, right? There was also the liberals, many of the Northern liberals, the moneyed liberals, the moneyed white liberals who were philanthropists, who he needed money, right? They were going to jail. You read about the fact that was always the struggle, right? It's like, we're going to jail, but who's going to get us out? If the Southern folks aren't going to let us out. They're not going to let us out. So we need money to get out. So any kind of social movement. you are going to need funding and resources. So he had to convince those folks, say, look, we are, we have a plan. We have a systematic plan. This is a thoughtful plan. This is a moral plan. This is a plan that will work. This is something that you can support and be proud of supporting. And if you support us, you are on the right side of history, right? So that's what this book kind of says and potentially can accomplish with all of these audience. And in particular, talking about the strategy of the tool of the weapon of nonviolent resistance. Remember last time I said what these moderates were seeing in their community, white moderates, Southern moderates, and moderates throughout the United States. It weren't just in the South, but those they were throughout the United States. What they were seeing when they had all of these movement campaigns in Albany, first starting with Montgomery, then going into Albany and some of the sit-ins, and then sitting in at the lunch counters, and then on to Birmingham. What they were seeing is the marchers would come, and then there would be chaos. Many times, though it didn't happen in Albany, we can talk about that. Many times, the powers that be, the people who were the police, for example, would lash out, which is really what King wanted. They would lash out and attack the participants in the movement. People perceive that as just chaos. King comes into town, and what happens? There's just chaos. And so, moderates were like, well, wait a minute, we don't want to see that in our community. It just seems to upset it. We can't go to the stores, and it seems to create a lot of strife. Sometimes there's violence. So that's what they're seeing. So King then has to say, okay, I need to explain that, yes, this happens, but really what you are seeing is the enactment of a moral plan. And those who are against us react to us. Those who are not squarely within our camps, Blacks, even who are not squarely within our camp, and who have not been trained in the sort of the spiritual and the strategic and the logistical and the mental grounding to wield the weapon, the sword that heals of nonviolence, they're going to lash out. So they're going to be fighting. So that's what you're seeing. So he had to do that. That is the challenge, the quintessential challenge of a movement leader, right? You've got to partner with all of these people so that you can create a critical mass so as to move society in a direction that you want them to go, right? People are forming partnerships, but as much as you have some common interests, there's also some interests that you don't have. You're different. You might not use the same methods. You might not have the same messaging, right? And so they're different. So the leader, somebody like King, has to come in and try to create a big tent, right? That's why the March on Washington was symbolically very important in a lot of ways, but certainly symbolically. That was that big tent. You had people from all different interests, from Hollywood, from business, from the South, from religion, from non-religion. You had all of those people there, and that's what that symbolized, right? So anyway, it can be studied from a rhetorical perspective as King put this out there, because he needed to engage, he needed to articulate, and he needed to explain what they were doing. And then, of course, the last thing I said, the last way you can look at it is just philosophically. I think it's really interesting, especially Letter from Birmingham Jail, to think about the spiritual and philosophical foundations of wielding something like the sword that heals. I mean, think about that terminology. The sword, is a sword that sort of cuts both ways. It was a moral, it came from a moral impetus. Indeed, from King's perspective, he would align it with a religious impetus, although Gandhi wielded it. So it was not necessarily just Christian, right? But it was certainly, moral. And so he had to, we can study that element that gets a little bit abstract, but that element of movements. What's the spirit of the movement? Yes, we can talk about the zeitgeist of the time, but what's the spirit? What is the spirit of this movement, right? So, we have those three ways in which we can look at this text: historically, rhetorically, and also we can look at it philosophically. Any questions? Any questions or reactions? That's what I tend to do. I just put it out there, go on and on, and then.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question so far.
Yes.
I think everybody's just enjoying listening.
Okay, all right. Well, no questions or comments. This evening, what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus on King's voice. We didn't read a lot from his passages from the book, but his voice, his legacy, and the lessons that we can in fact learn from him. Right. So that's hence the questions that Christina will put, will share with you. So if any of the questions are framed in a way that it's like, well, put it in say that differently, or can you say that differently, or elaborate or explain the question? No worries. Just let me know and I will certainly do that. Christina.
Yes, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now.
Okay.
Okay. So we have here. You guys, do you all see the PowerPoint that I have up? Oh, it might help if I actually start it from the beginning. I had it from the beginning before. All right. Can you see those? Can you see the PowerPoint screen?
Yes, I can see it.
All right. Thank you. I know sometimes people don't have a hard time with it.
So feel free to sort of read the question there. And, what really jumps out at me and what I put in that question was the sword that heals. Is that not just powerful imagery? A sword that heals, something that will cut through hatred on the one hand, but also heal the hearts of enemies or opposition on the other. I think that is just brilliant to say, here's our methodology. And the reason why we're going to do it is, one, that fundamentally, that our movement is about love, right? Last time, I think we talked about it wasn't a sentimental love, right? But it was love as a generative, universal force. Right? It is a force that it is generative, it is creative, and it is powerful within the universe. And what King was trying to say is we are, and his vehicle, the vehicle for him, and many African Americans at the time was Christianity, was their faith, and more precisely, the Black church. The Black church was the symbol, the disseminator of that power and that love. On the one hand, we will fight for justice, but on the other hand, tomorrow we will love you. And that's how it was done in the Black church, which, by the way, I can't wait to see the PBS documentary on it. It's with Henry Louis Gates. It's supposed to be amazing. Any thoughts on this question about, he says that there's a practical and a moral answer, that the sword that heals, nonviolent direct action, and that is, the marches, the sit-ins, those were the pray-ins. That's called nonviolent direct action, and that's how you wield or protest with that quote unquote sword that heals. Those are the methods for the sword that heals. So my question was about what practical and moral value does this method of resistance give King and the movement? And what's the limitations of this nonviolent resistance? It's like, well, it's challenge. What is the challenge to using it? And what might keep it from being as effective? and you can reflect on what you read in the book, or just what you know based on what you have experienced with protest.
Now, at the moment, if you can unmute yourself, if you have something to say, go ahead and you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
And go ahead, MB.
I have a slightly different perspective from probably the rest here. My mother's family was from Birmingham. My grandparents, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles were in Birmingham in 1963. I was 120 miles from there in Demopolis, Alabama, as a junior in high school. And I could see, even as a junior in high school, I could see a practical value in the method. It was that King and his associates were pushing the envelope right to the limit. And building actually a following because they were not violent. One of his challenges was that he could not control everyone. And there was a lot of violence. My own father was stopped by a human chain, and the only reason he was finally allowed to go was that it was a hunting season, and as the people approached the car, they saw a shotgun in the back. So he was allowed to go. And King could not have any impact on that. As far as the limits to the effectiveness, all you have to do is look at Turkey right now. If King had done what he did in today's Turkey, he would simply be in jail. Yeah. And there would be no bail. He would be like so many of the journalists. He would simply be locked up until his power diminished. So that's what I saw and continue to see on that question.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect answer. One of the challenges is that it's like you said, that you cannot control everyone. Right? There were people who had gone through, the Highlander schools and gone through the school and the workshops to be nonviolent, because it was bringing in the spiritual aspect of it. It takes a strong spiritual constitution to discipline oneself to not hit back when one is hit. So I think you hit the nail on the head. The practical value for King, he would have said that at least during that time, that this was a way in which they could protect themselves from, if they advocated nonviolence, they could protect themselves from being, not just locked up, but being killed. African-American perceptions of African-American, I guess, aggression, we perceive Black aggression differently, or even Black assertiveness differently than white assertiveness. And we have seen the evidence of that. And so when you see masses of Blacks together, that's frightening for whites in the community. It was frightening. And so, had King been advocating violence and a bloodbath, I think they surely would have, that would license the law enforcement to kill them. And of course, the moral value for this is just that, going back to the sword that heals, it's the idea of, a strategy that's rooted in love, and gives you the moral high ground. And since Christianity was a motivation at the time, and this aligned itself with Christianity and Christian principles, at least their interpretation of it. And so it seemed to be a movement of integrity. So that's how I would answer that question. Thank you. Thank you very much. Last time, MB, you shared your personal experiences, and I think that's so important. So we've got what's King saying, and then we have you and your lived experience, and that's invaluable when we're trying to look back on history and understand it, and perhaps even judge it. So thank you. You've supplied crucial pieces.
I might add, in addition to that, that I said I went to school in Demopolis, Alabama. I actually lived outside of Demopolis near a village of Jefferson that was 5 to 1 black. So I was a minority in my area. It gave a different perspective, I think, yeah, from some of the others. But at any rate, I'll probably talk too much if you let me. So
thank you.
We'll go on. I do have a few other comments to make later on, especially about naivete. I was naive. I was one of those moderate whites that thought that if we just left well enough alone, things would work themselves out.
Yeah,
I think King was absolutely right about saying that. King was naive in thinking that that he had really done something extraordinary in Birmingham. I think he thought that he had done more than he actually did. Yeah. And then if you read Jesse Jackson's, he thinks that that Nazism has gone away, and the events of the last couple of months tell you that it has not. So at any rate, there are so many different aspects to this that we can take this off any direction at any point.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Christina, you ready for the next question?
Next question.
Mute yourself.
Let me go. There we go. Next question would be, I'll read the quote.
Yeah.
That helps. I was thinking I'll read the quote. The quote is chapter 7, page 108. King contends that with initial success, every social movement simultaneously does two things. It attracts to itself fresh forces and strength, and at the same time, it crystallizes the opposition.
Yeah, and so this question just really says, okay, how has King's observation been true for Black Lives Matter or any observation? Have you yourself, or any social movement, have you been involved in a political movement or a local community movement where, King's statement about the consequences of success were seen, right? So when you had some success, you decided you wanted to change something or be a part of change in your community, and you rallied with other people, and then you were successful or you made some progress, and then, man, you hit some opposition and some strong opposition, and you may have been attacked personally, or someone in your family or members of your group, or just you may have been stopped in your tracks by the opposition. Has anyone had that experience with, in trying to create change in their community? Sometimes even in an organization.
Cynthia, I think you just mentioned the last 4 years of our lives. I mean, so if you think about, the last 4 years, that would be my answer. Yes.
Well, that was the generator. that generated the question. When you see, and the backlash of the previous, against the previous administration, where there was, there seemed to be progress, and then you hit this, this other dynamic, this other force crystallizes in ways that we had not seen in way, and are still seeing, that we thought were well buried and were well behind us. That, yeah. I think you're absolutely right, to be honest, Tiffany.
And it's funny, I'm still shocked that Black Lives Matter is even like a disputable thing. Yeah. Like, it blows my mind that people debate this or think that it's debatable. I mean, So, and I think that because you have so many people who do think that. I mean, our own Lindsey Graham just came out and said he was going to impeach Kamala Harris for, basically supporting Black Lives Matter. It's definitely proves, I'm going to say this, it definitely proves Dr. King's point. And, it's kind of like one step forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah. But what's really interesting, and this is why I study rhetoric. First of all, Lindsey Graham is being willful in his misunderstanding and misrepresentation of that. He's being willful. He's being very strategic. And so you have media echo chambers and you have politicians who are misrepresenting it for political points, right? We teach it when I'm teaching students the power of certain kinds of rhetoric, right? I use what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so you take human beings, and at the base of this, it's a pyramid. At the base of this pyramid, what all human needs is what? You need food and you need water, right? To sustain the body or you will die. That's fundamentally what you need. But you know what you need right after that? Safety. I need to feel safe, right? So what is a powerful rhetorical strategy? It's to create fear. Create fear and then channel your fear towards someone or something. This situation is really bad, and you know what? It's because of them and it's their fault. And if we let them, they're really going to take over your lives. And that's going on right now. You've got people saying that right now. They're coming after you. Your lives will never, ever be the same. And so those fear appeals work. It is a rhetoric of anger and a rhetoric of fear and a rhetoric of grievance. Right. And we are what we call sentient beings. We act out of emotions. We are a ball. We are a ball of emotions. Right. We've got triggers all the time. I'm writing this book about confidence, and I was writing about, that stuff triggers us all the time. The challenge becomes to control our mind. Right. That becomes the challenge and our reaction to it. Right. You got people at work who trigger you. Right, they just do. You got people in your family who trigger you. You got groups, you got situations who just trigger you, right? And so, for your own peace of mind and just to being, if we're talking about at work being productive, then you just have to, you learn to manage, those. The emotions are there, but to frame them in different ways so they don't overtake you. But all of that to say, it's an incredibly powerful motivator. And it's sort of shorthand. It's a quick and dirty way of getting people riled up and getting attention, first and foremost, getting people riled up. And once you have them riled up, and once you have framed it in a way that, I don't know, Black Lives Matter, here's this awful radical group that seeks to take away your rights. They are the discriminators, not us. They're talking about race. We're not, they're the ones that are talking about race. Once you have that narrative out there, it's just naturally a very powerful narrative and a powerful motivator. And it's that kind of rhetoric that has crystallized that opposition, Tiffany, that you've observed and that we've all witnessed in the last 4 years. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So I have a question. How do you change it? How do we get to the point where we don't have and maybe this is too big and maybe that's a different whole meeting. Christina, you can set that up. But I want to fix it.
I know. It's tough.
It's way too big. For me personally, this is there may be, until there's some grand plan, and I don't know what that is. We have to figure out how we can do it in our sphere or our corner of the world. And it may be how you engage somebody at work or engaging someone at work. If you're in a power position, it may be some types of workshops that you could possibly come. For me, of course, it's the classroom. You know, when I teach public speaking, when I teach African American rhetoric, you know, that one of the things that I am teaching now is the first thing, media literacy. With public speaking, media literacy, and we look at across the political spectrum at how things are being talked about and represented. And so raise some awareness and consciousness of at least about that. It's like, okay, well, this is how you might be getting played.
And you know what, in dialogue, like Tiffany, when you led a discussion for us one time, and now here Dr. King's leading a discussion for us. Yes. I think it's going to just be a lot of long dialogue, yes, getting together with people and sharing Absolutely. Yourself.
Bravo to the Atlantic Institute for creating a space.
We have Judith would like to.
I think Reggie wanted to say something. Reggie, did you want to say something?
I was going to say that King, in the opening of his book, his premise is that it's only been 100 years since the Emancipation Proclamation, and nothing has really changed. So the actual discourse, the public discourse, bringing attention to discrimination and racism is really just getting started. Mm-hmm. And so right now we're in the embryonic stage of addressing that issue. And usually when something meets the public stage, when something that has been taboo becomes public, chaos ensues. That's a part of it. You're gonna have to expect that. But because it is on the public stage, there's a chance that you're gonna grow from that and you're gonna develop it. So 100 years, 1863, January 1st, 1863, to 1963, that's short. There was no change really. The enslaved individuals were called slaves, so we didn't change our language about them. The enslaved individuals only got physical freedom, but they didn't have freedom of mobility. So how they moved in the public space was still limited. And they really didn't have freedom of speech. How they spoke within the confines, say, of their work was very much limited. Now we get to 1963, and King is bringing that point to light. Now you're seeing these Black individuals over whom you've had your clamp in a straitjacket of sorts. And now they're coming out saying, we have been emancipated for 100 years and nothing really has changed. And yeah, I'm going to read it. It's on page 3 of mine, but the first
hold that thought, because I want you to read that. There's a question that actually relates to. So I want you to read that. Christina, would you forward it? Let me see when that gets to that question, Reggie, because that's I want you to read that. Would you go ahead? Oh, okay. Okay, this is not the question, but I think this is one. Would you read the quote, Christina?
Sure. This says, 2 days later, we did an audacious thing, something we had never done in any other crusade. We disobeyed a court order. We did not take this radical step without prolonged and prayerful consideration. Planned, deliberate civil disobedience had to be discussed as far back as.
And then the question is, why was this civil disobedience such a risky strategy for King and the movement? Any answers, any responses? So, you know what, I guess we all know what civil disobedience is. It is the deliberate disobeying and disregarding of a law. And of course, in this case, King believed, and it was right, the law, it was an unjust law, and he talks about that in Letter from Birmingham jail. But this was, he talks about how it was a risky move. He said that, and he takes pains to say that it was radical, it was audacious, but we did it. We did it with prolonged, or did it only after prolonged and prayerful and deliberate consideration. And he almost has to say that, because again, these are lawbreakers. This is what the opposition is saying. Look, King and his people are just lawbreakers, right? They are lawbreakers here, stirring up trouble. Their breaking of the laws will ultimately lead to violence. the moderates saw themselves above all as law-abiding citizens. And to hear even the opposition, someone like Bull Connor even, charging them with breaking the law was something that they had to give serious consideration to, but then ultimately decided it's worth it. We need to do that. But again, it was a risky strategy for King because he risked losing moderates, losing his support, losing folks who, for whom the law was law and order and being law abiding was a high value. So that was sort of the risk for King, but he took that risk and he had to. And this is also something that's important, and you see this throughout the book. He talks about how prayerful, how careful, and how deliberate they are. And remember, at the outset, I said that one of his challenges was to define the movement on its own terms, right? The opposition was trying to define the movement pejoratively in very negative ways, ways that were in contrast with the moderates' values. King was saying, oh no, really, what we're doing is actually aligned with your Christian values. It's aligned with a higher law. As a matter of fact, he says that in Letter from Birmingham Jail. What we're doing and what we're abiding by is a higher law, and that's a higher calling. Thank you, Christina. We can move on. Okay. All right, Reggie. This is where I want you to read your passage. But let's first read the question. King emphasizes the concept of time throughout the book. His letter from Birmingham Jail states famously that time itself is neutral. He discusses the timing of each campaign. Even in the book's title, Why We Can't Wait refers to time. Why is time and timing so important to King and the movement? I guess I should have said how and why is time and timing so important to King and the movement? Or how and why is time and timing important to any social movement, the civil rights movement, and to movements for social change in general? So Reggie, let's talk about what you were talking about. You started out actually making an observation about time, this time span that's really crucial to King's argument and really crucial in accounting for the kind of the quote unquote Negro Revolution.
And it's quite interesting. If you just take South Carolina after the Civil War, we were still suffering the after effects of that as late as the 1940s. Our economy was still suffering from that. So the Civil War is like yesterday when you start to deal with the South. And King's making this point, it's just been 100 years. It usually takes a good 50 to 100 years for a tradition to establish itself. As I said, it has to go through chaos because you're going to get a lot of rejection from those individuals who will be opposed to it, because the tradition itself will usually be deemed a little bit more sacred than that which is going to be new. And I think King notes that, because what he would do is to capture what's going on in the public life and then use that particular situation, making a metaphor to address what he's experiencing with the Black community. And I wanted to read this final passage before he gets to section 2 in that first chapter. He says, because there is more to come, because American society is bewildered by the spectacle of the Negro in revolt. They had not seen that because they had become complacent with all of the restrictions they placed on the Negro in public space. So you haven't seen it in public space. Because the dimensions are vast and the implications deep in a nation with 20 million Negroes, it is important to understand the history that is being made today, the history coming from that Emancipation Proclamation that really didn't give you anything but physical freedom, and your physical freedom is still limited in public space. The second part of that, he tells of how he's at a book signing and this woman stabs him, and then he takes that experience. And once again, in this rhetorical style, he uses that as a metaphor to talk about the plight of what Black individuals are going through. So you have this individual, King himself, looking at the situation of the struggle and applying that to the Black situation and trying to render some freedoms. So as Toni Morrison said in her particular essay that I shared with Christina, the occurrences that you're seeing in this period is going to happen on the backs of Black individuals to bring about that change. They have to be in the public space, disrupt that public space, make a few people uncomfortable, but it's because of who they are and what they represent in the subject positionality in the United States. They represent the negative. Because they represent that, they are the ones who can easily be seen, and they're the ones who can really bring about that change. I've always said that the Black individuals, I know too much like African American, Black individuals in the United States personify being human. It is they who, look at what we do. We patron other people's businesses. When we have communities of our own, they've been burnt down, they've been taken apart, whatever the case may be. And then you get individuals to not understand that. That's my issue with some of these things. They don't simply understand. I think King does. I think what he tries to do in this book to say that I'm talking about a 100-year span. And Black individuals have just awakened to the fact that they are not free.
Yeah,
and
I think you're
saying in the public is that it's been 100 years and we are not free. They've awakened. And
that's the focus of the question. You're absolutely right. It was why is time so important? Because as I've said a few times in this discussion, that to the non-participants, the onlookers, it was like, why is the Negro all of a sudden just, as you say, going and exploding into these spaces, right? Why all of a sudden? And King says, oh, no. It's not been, a long time. This is a matter, it's not been a short time. This is not something that has happened overnight. There has been a trajectory of oppression, a trajectory of continuing oppression. And he recounts, remember I said that one of the things that King does well is to give voice to not just the dissatisfaction, but the oppression, the humiliation, all of the things that African Americans have suffered. He gives voice to that. And not only does he give voice to it, he also presents it in a way that emphasizes that it's been a long, long time in coming. And this is why in 1963, per the book's title, this is why we really can't wait, because it's been such a long time for this humiliation. And then he, not only because it's been just sort of what he calls the fierce urgency of now. That fierce urgency of now was, we've changed the Constitution. And when slaves were freed, we changed the Constitution. Supreme Court has had rulings with Brown versus Board of Education. Still, you have local governments who circumvent this. So our only choice, this is really our only choice, is to go to the street. We have to create what's called a crisis. We create a crisis so that the powers that be will come to the decay table and engage with us. As it stands now, they have no reason. There is no recourse. They won't be put in jail. We're still getting beaten and maimed and jailed and discriminated against, but the opposition, the racist, they incur no penalty. So what's left to do? Right. This is why, this is why we have to act now. He talks on page 74. I have this quote about time itself being neutral. I think it's a wonderful quote, and I'd like for us to consider it. He says, actually, time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. More and more feel that people of ill will have used time much more effectively than have people of goodwill. We have to repent in this generation, and not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. So he's saying that the racists are have actively undercut the Constitution. And as I said just a moment ago, the Supreme Court rulings, the law of the land, they have actively put that to good use. But people of goodwill are silent. And in a moment, we'll have a question about the silence of the so-called people of goodwill. Thank you.
May I add something?
Absolutely, Sebastian.
I just want to go off of like what you said and what Mr. Brewster said, and the time we're living in now and the time during 1963 is what Dr. King describes in his letter to Birmingham as like a negative piece. And this sort of negative piece can only be like transformed through action. And although even today, there might be moderates or people that are naive and they don't see like how this is still an issue. Like we see it like everywhere in our lives. Like I read a book recently, and it was about a wrongfully accused African-American man who received the death penalty. The book was called Just Mercy. But it was really interesting to see that, even today, people are accused out of just racism and like you said, Mrs. King, like the people who do that, the cops, the sheriffs, just some societies as a whole and communities, that they don't get punished, nothing really happens to them. And so this sort of trend continues. And so unless we kind of disrupt the established order and sort of add a little bit of chaos, because the order can't be a negative piece, as Dr. King says, it has to be a positive piece. And we can only do that through our action and through creating a bit of chaos.
Well, absolutely. That's perfect. And that's a beautiful parallel to 1963. That's exactly the way that they felt. It's like, wow, we have no recourse. We have no choice. We are being killed, and members of our community and members of our own family are being humiliated and being killed with impunity. So I love that. And it's beautifully said. That's when you have no choice, that's what you have to do. You have to take it, you have to have, that's the utility of nonviolent resistance. I mean, you disrupt, you have almost mass disruption, and we were talking about the best ways that can be used, because it's, you can have this disruption, but it can also turn on you and undermine what you're doing. So having a strategy, having a plan, and that's what King was saying. Look, it looks like sometimes we're creating chaos, but this is a plan. First of all, it's moral. It's the right thing to do. And we have thought about it, we've planned it, and it is not chaos. And you actually, and he goes one step further and say, you actually hurt us with your silence. And I have a question about that also a little later. Thank you so much. That's a wonderful connection. And that's the point of, and the emphasis of tonight. And I think you've done it best so far. Thank you. So appreciate that. Christina, you want to advance the slide? Or are we late?
No, I'm pretty sure we're going to speak for a while. for a little bit longer, at least I have a feeling. So thinking for a second, I have a thing to share. Is this organization and a lot of the other organizations that have been started by Turkish Americans were part of the Hizmet movement. And the Hizmet movement is a worldwide movement. And Hizmet stands for giving or volunteering. So I donate part of my hours every week, towards this, because we can only afford so much. So I always take part in this Hizmet, and a lot of the volunteers take part. They share their time and their resources, but it's designed about, having dialogue. Part of it is dialogue. Part of it is education. There's a big push for getting your PhDs or your degrees, becoming well educated, having dialogue with people from all different faiths and backgrounds and nationalities, sharing of yourself, and hospitality. There's a lot to it, and I'm thinking what we were saying is we have still persevered. In Turkey, there are so many journalists and so many people that are in prisons, that were in prison just because they were associated with this movement. And there are so many organizations like us throughout the US that when the coup happened in Turkey, they got crippled some. They couldn't, they have a hard time continuing moving forward because some of them had family and they had this and that, and there was a lot of conflict, and I'm thinking how this kind of this has been my job for 8 years, but I've grown to love everybody that is part of this, and I think how sad it is that there's been this crippling, but it's made me dig my heels in more and say, no, we're going to continue to have dialogue, and we're going to continue to do this, even if I had to do this at no charge, even if I had to do this, we always provide everything for free, because this is vital. This is important stuff, and that, so I figure, thinking of this time thing being neutral, like at some point in time, there will be that, Judith, you said it, make good trouble, right? You said make good trouble in the comments in the chat. Because there are so many people in Turkey that are hurting over this, that are in prison, and their bank accounts are taken away and their houses are taken away, that at some point this has to change again. I mean, they've kind of like been suppressed for 4 or 5 years now, but at some point there's gonna have to be a making of good trouble, of something that helps move this again forward, because this was there were hospitals and universities and everything that was closed just because they were a part of this Hizmet movement that were providing such wonderful resources for communities and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, it's just been so incredibly vital to, and so I just like, that was my thought when we were coming up. I'll go to the next question now. There we go.
Judith, I see I want to acknowledge Judith. Judith's put some really thought-provoking comments in the chat. The movement to give Palestinians their civil rights has been politicized into being anti-Semitic. Yeah, Semitic. As the movement has grown, laws have been passed to ban boycotting of Israel's illegal settlements. Facebook has considered banning criticisms of Zionism as also being anti-Semitic. It's interesting. Rhetoric is amoral, and the strategies of effective persuasion can be used for good or for ill. And they can be turned on people. So let's see.
All right.
Want to read the quote?
I will go ahead and read the quote.
This can be our last question.
Okay. Throughout the book, but especially in Letter from Birmingham Jail, King expresses disappointment in white moderates, and especially the white church. Chapters 5, pages 73 through 78. Dr. King also praises and lists select white ministers and the coalition of churches supporting the coalition of churches. Yeah. So Dr. Ibram Kendi's recent book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, defines racist as people expressing racist ideas or supporting racist policies with action or inaction. Kendi declares that It is not enough to not be racist, but one must be anti-racist. For him, there is no neutral ground.
And how are King's criticisms of white moderates relevant to Kendi's assertions about racism and neutrality? In other words, how does King's assertion support or reject Kendi's and vice versa? So how do these work together? Anybody with any thoughts on that? If you haven't read Kendi's book, it's a great read. It's an interesting read. It's an informative read. It's thought-provoking. So I highly recommend it. Let me read you from 73 what King says, some of the things he says about the white moderate. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand the law and that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become dangerously structured dams and block the flow of social progress. I had hoped the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepts his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We are merely bringing to the surface the we are merely bringing to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. So that's one criticism of the white moderate. He also says in 74, I'd hope the white moderate would reject the myth concerning time in relation to all struggle with freedom. I have just received a letter from a white brother in Texas. He writes, all Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually, but it is possible that you are in too great a religious hurry. It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish this. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth. And so King is quoting this white Christian, quote unquote, brother from Texas. And that relates to that whole idea about time. But he's in this, it's especially in Letter from Birmingham jail. And if you don't know, he's in jail. He has received or gotten wind or read a letter published in the Birmingham News or a Birmingham paper signed by lots of religious leaders in the community, asking him to wait, essentially to tamp down or to step away from his demonstrations. His demonstrations were causing chaos, even as they admitted that, yes, the Negro is not treated well, but they were saying that his approach is not helping the matter. And that's when he wrote the Birmingham jail. These were the people who he said, it's not the, what is it, the saying, it's not the actions of our enemies, but the silence of our supporters that are the greatest, impediment to moving forward. And so I had Kendi, I put these two in conversation with each other, Kendi and King, because Kendi says there's no neutrality. It's not enough to say, well, I'm not racist, but are you against racism? And what do you do, to fight racist policy? So he's wanting, like King wants for the white Christian moderate, or moderates in general, but white Christians in particular, he wants them to be much more proactive, in their support of the movement, and much more vocal about, about the injustice to Blacks in his day. Does that sound familiar?
Definitely.
Any comments? Any last comments?
I just read The Color of Compromise, which is essentially about the church and their impact or not, their non-impact in racism throughout the history of the United States. And it's so fascinating because I think Dr. King also always wanted for people to stand up and speak out. And I mean, I'm going to say, I personally want that now for more people who claim to be, religious to stand up and speak out and say, you know, it's not right. The things that people are going through, the disparities between black and white, like we should do something about that.
Right.
And it's fascinating to me that if you look at, even when slaves or people who've been enslaved, when they switched to Christianity, and kind of the whole movement between them switching to Christianity and becoming Christians and what that meant, and how they could see a whole different idea, even though the people who were enslaving them were Christians, and how they wrestled with that. And it's still the same type of idea between, with, you know, Letters from a Birmingham Jail, which is one of my favorite things. I listen to it all the time. And compared to, you know, what Ibram Kendi's saying. So it's fascinating that it really has not changed. And yet, you know, so much has changed, but so little has changed. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, you know, last time we talked, the last discussion, I talked about my approach to teaching young folks is continuity and change and relevance, right? So I teach African American rhetoric. So what's stayed the same? What changes have been made? But where are the through lines? And how are they manifesting in different periods of time? And so this is, for me, and I hope you found this to be the case, that this has been a nice, you know, kind of looking at that continuity and change framework, because there's so much here that aligns with, you know, situationally, contextually, you know, the racial landscape. There is much that aligns with what was going on in 1963. Sebastian pointed that out. You know, I think, and I may have said this last time, that King would probably be amazed and yet puzzled. It's like, but you had a Black president, and now and on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have mass incarceration. You know, on the one hand, I was pushing Kennedy to say, look, you need to say more about civil rights. You know, you need to speak up for what's right. And it seems like you're having to still criticize leaders for not speaking up as well. So I think he would be, you know, wow, you have a woman of color as a vice president, but also, wow, he would also, you know, Black political power. On the one hand, it's kind of like, well, you know, the low numbers that Blacks had previously voted in previous election cycles, but what has happened in Georgia? So you have, you know, kind of, you know, some continuity and change and advances, but also some really frustrations and disappointments. I know you guys have lives and folks and people and other cool stuff to get to. I don't have anything else, but Christina might.
I'm just going to say Reggie put added into the chat. I just saw on here. He added into here. White moderates were part of the white community who were bewildered by the spectacle of the Negro in revolt. It was they who said "wait," as King notes in Letter from Birmingham Jail, and King responded saying, "Wait means never." White moderates said America was not ready for change because they were comfortable with the status quo. They could dislike or think that they disliked the mistreatment of Blacks, but they were used to such mistreatment of Blacks. And frankly, they accepted the status quo. And then he said, a new book to consider is The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather McGee.
That looks good. That sounds good.
And that was a very, very good thing to add. I had to laugh a little bit and smile because my family is very different colors, all different colors, because I'm a foster parent. I'm a second generation foster parent. So we have children of all different colors usually with us. And we, in another book discussion that we've had, I remember Paul Thompson was leading one of them, and he said, you have a different view because when you have, there's different views you form as you grow up because of your background, because of different, you know, my daughter has her Black baby dolls and she's gone out with them. I've never, you know, people will give you the eye. Like, why has she got that Black baby doll? And white people will give you the eye and Black people will give you the eye. And I'm like, you know, like, come on, people, you know. but I was just laughing because a couple of weeks ago I was in Dollar Tree, and you go and you only get like 3 things, but I ended up with like 35. And the guy behind me had one thing. He just had a newspaper, and he was just wanting to get his newspaper. And so I bought my stuff, and I said, "Is that all you're getting?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, I'll just get his newspaper too." And I figured it was good for the kids to see me doing something for somebody else and all that stuff. And he just laughed. He said, "Next Wi-Fi get's gonna be white." And I just was like, I'm just buying it because it has nothing to do with the fact that we're different colors. I'm just being nice. But all the people in the store were smirking and were cracking up. Yeah. And I just thought, oh yes. MB said another good book is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo.
Yeah. Yeah.
But good. I am in a little southern town in Georgia here, so I experience seeing lots of different varying ways of being that people have. Yeah. And I find it very interesting.
It's so, I bet you see a lot where at the end of one event and conversation, you see it generates the need for other conversations, which is, we're blessed to have the Atlantic Institute to facilitate conversations like this. Christina, thank you so much for having me. Would you mind if I got a screenshot? Did you get a screenshot of everyone?
I got a few for you earlier.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just wanted to get just a screenshot of the folks who were here, just because I'm happy for the privilege to have spoken and engaged you all. Let me just, before I leave, any questions, any burning questions or comments?
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. I really do appreciate. Thank you so much.
One quick note.
Sure.
Did you know that Spartanburg was chosen by the Supreme Court to be the model southern city for implementation of Brown versus Board?
I did not.
And a map has been produced. I have a copy of it from the University of Virginia's Law Library that shows the location of every Black student and every white student in the city of Spartanburg in about 1953, if they took a map before the implementation of it. But I think, Dr. King, you would find it extremely interesting to get a copy of that map and look at it. And you're welcome to take a look at mine if you like.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Awesome. Well.
And I thank you all for being a part of this and for sitting on here and listening. If you did not get to share, just sitting on here listening, when all of the rioting started last summer, I made a commitment to having more discussions on race issues. That's the only way we're gonna make any kind of ground, gain any kind of ground, is to read books, educate, and have discussions. Yeah. So I thank you all for being on here and for taking part in this.
Thank you so much. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. King.
Bye, everybody. Have a good evening. Thank you, Dr. King. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. You're just a pleasure to work with. I really do appreciate. I think I'm on sabbatical, but I'm being very, very judicious about what it is I do. But I really wanted to do this. I really
absolutely.
Did. It was like, this is great. You remember I said, at the beginning, I said, oh, a captive audience. It's like, it's great to not have people are here because they want to be here. Oh,
absolutely.
Now that I have them, man, I'm going to tell them some stuff and hopefully I listened well enough.
I believe so. Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you, Alicia, for your help in spreading the word about all this.
Well, I haven't done a whole lot, but I did have a question for the two of you because this, conversation we didn't really get into, but about toxic theology, and it's a subject that I